Welcome to the NonSequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
That worked. There we go. All right, let me fix that audio real quick. 1 second here. All right. Sorry about that. Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. As usual, we have audio problems, so I fixed it. I fixed it though. You know what's so funny? I just streamed on the Great Debate Community channel some not so serious reviews of my paper. And I had it all right. There's no problems whatsoever. But as soon as I switch to this channel, I don't know what it is about Streamlabs OBS. It just goes nuts. So anyways, the sound is fixed now. But anyways, welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. For those who may have noticed, I didn't stream last week. The reason being is, if you may or not known, I don't know. But I got a promotion at work, which means I'm spending a lot more time at work. But, you know, look, I'm still doing Non-Sequitur. I'm still doing my shows on my own channel, and then I also need to stream a little bit more on the Great Debate Community channel, so I'll probably be streaming there late night, like midnight stuff, which is good for the UK and for Australians, but it hasn't affected the Non-Sequitur Show too much, but I probably want to be doing about three times a month rather than 4, depending on schedule, and it will be switching probably to Thursdays because I now have to work Fridays. So anyways, except for this Friday, I'm still off. But anyways, you don't care about that. You care about a review of my paper. So let me introduce my guest here, he's Dr. William Pye, but he goes by evilpie, which I'm going to ask him how he got that name in a second. But he's a friend of mine from quite some time, a little bit, who was generous enough to actually read my paper and do a kind of a informal, formal review of it on his blog. So let me introduce Dr. Pye to my audience here.
Hello.
This is, I didn't really realize, but this is actually not just the first time you've been on Non-Sequitur, but it was the first time we really had a hangout together, man.
Yep, it is.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so cool because, you know, we talk all the time and stuff, and I love your channel. You have some video stuff that you started to do, or on your Twitter stuff that you're promoting, which by the way is in the video description. And I hope that you follow through with some of the things that you wanted to write about. I've read your work, and we're not getting into the actual stuff, but you know your stuff, and I'm impressed. Yeah. And so I was thrilled when you were like, hey Steve, I'll read your paper, and you, by the way, you found some actual errors in it because I had uploaded an older copy. I fixed everything, and I have a new copy. It's up there. I hope it's right. But anyways, long story short, I wrote a paper on Academic EDU on how the presumption of atheism by way of semantic square of opposition leads to semantic collapse, which is a fancy way of saying Fluger's argument sucks. Okay. And a lot of people on Facebook and other places kind of said my argument was invalid, it was unsound. So I said, okay, why don't we let the experts, or at least people that kind of know a little bit more about logic, or even, epistemology or philosophy or whatever, just kind of review it themselves. And to date, nobody has actually found any substantive errors. There were some minor typographical errors and some grammatical things that I fixed. But as far as the argument itself, to date, nobody's found any real issues with it. So I thought, Dr. Pye could come on and, in his own words, talk about his blog, talk about, what his review was talking about. We'll go to his blog in a second, and just kind of go from there. Sound like a plan?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So first, do you want to tell anybody about yourself, what you can talk about and what you can't talk about? No.
Indeed. So my name is William Pye. So hello again. My name is William Pye. That's the way I started some videos here and there. Yes, I did start a YouTube channel shortly after quitting my job at university. It's basically, I'm doing on that channel the same thing that I have always told my students that I could always do, which is go down to the bare metal of philosophy and build up to mathematics, build up set theory, then the category theory, and then branch off from there and see what happens. I have taught at university for about 10 years before I quit because I lost my mind.
University can do that to you, right?
It's true. Teaching from your bedroom from 18 months will do that. Yes, I did teach for 18 months during the pandemic, and through a carnival of errors, which is more talked about in private than in public, I decided to leave university and essentially go to another job elsewhere. And that's where I'm at now. So a lot of shenanigans along the way. So my degree is in mathematics. There's all my degrees up there. So yay, hooray. But yeah, I'm a mathematician. I once asked my dissertation advisor, boss, what am I? He said, you're a mathematician. I said, then I asked him, but what kind of mathematician? Algebraist, topologist, analyst. And he's like, that's a good question. I basically dabble in a little bit of everything. So I do have a particular area of expertise, a particular set of skills, one might say.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say you have a particular set of expertise, but you are so well rounded, because I know for a fact you are, because you had written you were a guest actually writer on my blog, and you had written a really brilliant piece on the hierarchy of set theory and ring theory, basically of what a field and what a group, and it was so well laid out that I was like, man, I can actually understand this. This is not, it's hard. I mean, that stuff's not easy stuff, but you laid it in a way where you can explain a group from a field, and and I like that, because when I was trying to look into ring theory, I'm like, I don't understand any of this. I mean, I really didn't really grasp what, why it was commutative, why, what a field was, what is the identities. And then finally I started, learning on my own what they were. But your breakdown on that, which I'll put in the video description, which you can find on my blog, was really actually, it was excellent. It really was. So.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it.
I've read other stuff from you that I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. That's okay. No clue.
Yeah,
no, just
different audience.
Big words, symbols. I don't know.
Yeah, if my YouTube career goes as long as I hope it does, then one day I plan to get to actually covering those topics on the channel, provided I actually get back to doing it again. I've been waiting on this bloody book to show up, and it just hasn't shown up for like 6 months. So I'm about to make something happen there.
I miss having a hard copy. I used to have quite a collection of books, but over the years they kind of vanished. But I can find most things online. But there's something like a good hard copy, is there?
It's true. I actually have a lot of my research books right over there. The downside is that unfortunately, because of the move and the shenanigans around said move, a lot of my stuff is still near my former abode, and I'm working towards actually getting that all shipped up here to where I am now. So it's a thing that happens.
It's a thing. So let's I'm going to show the audience real quick my paper. I'm not going to go over it at all, because we're going to talk about his blog. But this was the paper, How the Presumption of Atheism by Way of Semiotic Square of Opposition Leads to Semantic Collapse. It has about 2,222 views, which, by the way, for Academic EDU is actually pretty good. I mean, that's a lot of views. And it is in the top 1%, which is basically, it means on views. But this is what it kind of looks like. I'm not going to go over it again. You can go check it out. But we are going to check out your review of it here on your blog, The Rogue Mathematician, Evil Pie. By the way, how'd you come up with that name?
That is actually a bit of a story unto itself. When I was in high school, many moons ago. So let's go back to...
You're not that old, jeez.
I'm 43, so my students thought I was old.
I got socks older than you.
But yeah, when I was in high school, this was around 94, 95, somewhere around there, maybe 96. I got an old Juno email account.
Oh,
so,
I remember Juno.
Oh yes,
Juno was a big thing. I was like, I got a Juno email account. You didn't know what the internet was, but we had email.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, that email account is now well past defunct, which is unfortunate because I actually had a lot of emails in there that I kind of wanted to keep, but oh well, it's gone now. But around that time, around Halloween, I think it was, on a lark, I wrote in the corner of my papers. At the time, I was really getting into algebra and analysis. So I was getting into specifically Euler's formula. And Euler's formula is
that's how I know
e to the pi I is equal to -1.
That's how I know you're a mathematician. You say Euler.
Oh, yes. Because I actually, well, I also took a class in conversational German. So I actually do know how to pronounce German words. Yeah. Unfortunately, my diction is terrible. But yeah. Around that time, I was writing e to the pi I in the corner of my papers because not a lot of people knew about it in my high school. And I was like, yay, I knew something that's really cool. And I thought of it as kind of my signature. Well, one Halloween, I wrote evil to the pi I. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep that. And that became my email address. And it's kind of proliferated ever since.
Yeah, I know it's funny because I think Euler's identity is, or even not even that identity, even what the identity is derived from of Euler's formula, is probably the single most brilliant mathematician formula in all of history. I mean, I don't think people realize how much is compactified in that single solitary statement. It's pretty impressive. E to the pi I plus 1 equals 0, or e to the pi I equals -1. But that comes from, what is it, cosine x plus I sine x?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of my favorite things. Seriously, I was like, man, this guy was smart. Euler knew his stuff. But yeah, that's funny. I like that evil pi. So you're an evil transcendental number. There you go.
Yeah. There's actually the reason why I decided to keep that ever since is because, especially when I was in high school, because high school was hell, I kind of felt separated from everyone else, and it's like, okay, if everyone else is the positive one, well,
because you're a math nerd. Mathematicians are treated differently. I'm sorry, because you got to have a special brain for math. Some people just get it, some people don't, and then the rest of us are kind of like struggling. I mean, even though I had math, I had calculus level math. It was nothing that came easy to me. I had to work, and people like yourself, it's like, oh yeah, you're the kind of guy who goes, oh yeah, I know ABC congruent to DF, the internal angles of the isosceles triangle, So,
well,
I hated people like you in nuke school. By the way, we had one guy like you in nuke school. He didn't even have to study. He just knew. He goes in for the test, goes out that night, parties, gets drunk, comes in the next day. Oh yeah, the formula for the Stark-Rate equation. It's like, how the hell is it? I know this stuff.
I remember those days. I remember getting drunk and coming back and taking a test. However, on the contrary, the other way around is my problem. I had trouble writing things. So when I was in doing literary or creative writing, hell, even writing academics, took me a while to get the hang of it. And that's part of why I have a fiction section on the page, because my other hobby is doing fan fiction. So, and that's something I've been doing since I was in high school. And it's basically been an outlet for me to get better at my writing. And that's actually, my first paper was tossed back at me by the publisher because they said, your language is too flowery, you need to dry it up. And I'm like, but I worked so hard to make it pretty.
You want to do the opposite when you're writing a paper, though, right? You don't want to keep it flowery. You want to kind of keep it on point.
Yes,
which, by the
exactly.
way, we'll get into your criticism of my paper here, which I take on board. Obviously, I'm not an academic. I didn't have to write a paper for some kind of, cool. I mean, I wrote college levels papers in college, but they were nothing like this. But I didn't have to write this for any kind of publication or peer review because I'm not an academic. I have no need to publish, no offense. But I wanted to write it in a way where the average person could read it, get something out of it as far as the argument, and go back and review the logic, both in predicate, propositional logic and Boolean logic, and go, hey, this has been validated more than one way. And that's why I use multiple forms of logic on it. I was going to ask you something. Oh, yeah, by the way, somebody in my audience, tau is better than pi. I happen to believe that. Do you agree? Tau?
No, I rather prefer pi, thanks.
You failed.
But I'm a bit partial, though. I'm biased.
Yeah, I get it. No, I get it. But I like tau. I think tau works better. But anyways, you did read my paper, and this is the blog. This blog is in the video description. Please go check it out. I would assume you got some traffic your way by writing this.
Yes. In particular, I haven't looked at the numbers today, but when I looked at it like a day or two after, and it was beating everything else on my site. So,
my name has power. No, it's kidding.
It does.
No, I mean, no, but I mean, you know, the fact you're not the only one who has written about some of the things I've talked about. Answers and Reason has Joe from Answers and Reason, and I like his stuff. But this is the first more formal, even though it's informal, but it's still very mathematically formulated review of my blog that really took it to the next level. Other people have, you know, weighed in on it, and they're like, yeah, this is good, and blah blah blah. But this was, matter of fact, the only criticisms of your blog that people had when I posted this on my social media was like, this guy's wordy. But I was like, no, but he wanted you know, to break it down detailed, and I was like, no, I'm all for that. And I went through your logic too, and I didn't find any problems. So all right, so start us off here. What do we got here? This is only like March 26th, so it hasn't been very long ago. In this, you want to read your introduction and kind of describe what you're arguing here, what you're saying about my paper. I'll just leave it to you. Yeah.
Oh, certainly. I have been vicariously following the discourse concerning the semantics of the term atheism for some time now. That is, what does or should the word atheism mean and entail? For your paper, Steve McRae describes how a modern usage of the term atheism can lead to a semantic collapse, provided an analogous usage is allowed for the term theism. The goal of the present work is to understand and critique the arguments of for. As a matter of transparency, and this is where I caveat everything down here, I will preamble my comments by acknowledging three potential sources of bias. First, while I'm formally educated in mathematics, C degrees, general philosophy is not my area of expertise. Second, though I am familiar with first-order logic, belief logic is not a topic that I have studied at length. That's actually quite true. Third, I am amicably acquainted with Steve McRae, and he has been an influence on my views. I aim to minimize these biases by focusing almost exclusively on the topics and arguments in for, and by citing any sources, any outside sources that I use as reference.
Which I think is perfectly fine. I mean, you let people know, you know, we are acquainted. We've got a good, I guess, working kind of relationship. I mean, we
I would say so.
We're very amicable to each other. I mean, I'm a huge fan of what you've written, and you know, you want to let people know that, look, you know, even though you know me, you're still going to like crap on my work if it's bad. and by the way, all cards on the table. Before he did this, you know, he gave me the opportunity to kind of fix any kind of minor errors. He penned everything, and I fixed what I could fix, and you know, and asked me some questions about it. So, you know, and I think that was, you know, nice of him to do. You know, somebody who's doing a regular review is probably not going to do that because they're not going to know the person. So I was able to correct things a little bit, you know, in more of a real time. But as far as like his opinion, I told you straight up, say what you got to say, right? I mean, if it's wrong, crap on it. I didn't give you any guidance on that. You know, I was like, just don't hurt me too bad kind of stuff. But but I mean, I totally completely said, review it how you would view anything else. Did I not?
Yes, you did. And I actually read an earlier version of this before my move. So my move was back in May around June 2022. So I read a version of this back then. And I gave you some feedback at the time, basically, yeah, this looks kind of all right. But I didn't break down and do the formalism myself until here recently.
Yeah. And my original version of this, I had a short version that I put on my blog, and that's the one that's on creation.com that Dr. Sarfati had. He likes the compactified, just short version of it, which is not exactly what I was going for with the argument, because this argument was more about refuting Flu's argument. My other one was really more the what I call the WASP argument, or the weak atheist special pleading argument. It was really more showing that, look, these positions are all kind of the same, but I took it and kind of made it broader for my paper that you reviewed. But my original one is on my blog, and it's actually a little, like I said, a little more compactified. And Dr. Sarfati, who is a younger creationist, who I don't agree with, obviously, on younger creationism, he liked it so much he put it on creation.com, which I'm flattered by, because again, we don't agree on a lot of stuff, but we happen to just kind of have a good, again, working relationship. And so just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean that he can't, you know, appreciate, you know, your work. So I like Dr. Sarfati. He's actually a pretty cool guy. And I was really flattered for him to do that. And hopefully he might update it with his new one. But anyways, so you out there that, you know, trying to minimize any bias and things like that. So let's kind of get into the actual review itself.
All right.
Number 2.
All right. So number 2, background and notation. So this whole section is basically me building up the background. Now, some of this, if I was doing a formal review on, say, like Math Reviews or on some other formal page, section 2 would probably be skipped entirely. The reason being is because section 2 here is almost entirely background that you should be able to go and look up, or would be otherwise abridged if you were to write, say, a formal paper in a journal. The reason being is journals like to try and keep things concise and to the point. This, however, I elaborated to kind of get the flavor of what's about to happen.
I'm really glad you did too, because this is showing that somebody who knows the maths and the logic can break it down in a way that basically shows my logic is valid, right? Like, you're right. Somebody who would write these kind of papers would automatically kind of know all this stuff already, probably. But the people that are reading this stuff, the people that read my paper, they're amateurs like myself. They're lay people like myself for the most part. And so they can look at what you read and go, okay, now there's a little more formality to it, a little more structure that is weighing that the chances of my argument being good is being much higher. So I'm glad that you formalized this. I'm glad you wrote it the way you did. And by the way, I recognize your notation. I have the PDF of the book that it's from. Was it? Did you use? It was a Flick or? Who was it? I have the notation you use. I have the PDF.
Oh,
who was that from?
Well, there's a couple books that I've been pulling from my web series. Actually, there's Gensler's Introduction to Logic.
Gensler Introduction to Logic. That's what it was. Yeah, Gensler.
Yeah. There's Harry Gensler's book. Gensler. There's also 2 others by Suppes and Hill. Those 2 are more mathematical in flavor, because that's actually where I wanted to go. Wanted to take a lot of this, and of course, I did pull from Magnus and Buttons for all X as well. So I kind of a smattering of all of it. Yeah, no, I it's just so funny because, like I said, your notation is just a different form of notation, but it means this pretty much the same thing. And it is. Yeah. This is actually a problem I have at work, is that one of my colleagues is more a different direction in one of the other sciences than I am. So he says one thing, I say another thing, and we have to conflab for a moment to figure out what the hell we're saying.
All right. Let's see here. There we go. Go ahead.
All right. So starting off with section 2 here, what we got is, before delving into the body of the work itself, this section exposits some background of the issue at hand and establishes notation used throughout the subsequent sections. The usual sentential connectives, conjunction, disjunction, negation, etc., will be implemented as needed, and their usage and properties can be found in your usual references. See the 2, 3, 6, and 7, which are the books that I mentioned just now. Belief logic. So, for a subject U and a proposition P, the sentence, quote, U believes that P, it can be written as, and I use the actual parenthesis notation here, B of U, comma, P. Now, this is different than the notation that Steve has. The reason is that I tend to think of my propositions more as functions, because I'm a mathematician. But the way he writes it is basically the same, except without the parentheses and the comma. They're almost identical otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, if you can understand one, it's just notational. That's all it is.
It is. And my flair for category theory is very much towards getting my notation the way I like it. And of course, I have a citation there. It's to page 211. I think that's Gensler's book. Since a subject can hold contradictory beliefs, because politicians exist, the following assumption will be taken to allow for some inferences to be drawn from the hypotheses on belief.
Cognitive dissonance is the same. People who contradict your beliefs, they may not be on current, and they may be dispensational, we're called, rather than current. But people hold conflicting beliefs all the time. We just may not recognize it, believe it or not.
Right. Yeah. And it's one thing I've tried to do in my own philosophy is trying to minimize that as much as possible, which is why I brought this definition up. Because Gensler actually has an entire section on very much trying to understand the doxastic belief structure and what can lead from that. I've only read sections of it. I haven't read in this chapter entirely, but I do recommend it. What I've read of it has been very good. But he uses this definition, which is completely consistent. A subject U is completely consistent if the set S sub U of propositions believed by U satisfies the following conditions. First, it has to be logically consistent, so S sub U as a collection is a consistent set of propositions. And it's also closed on implication. So for all propositions P, if the set S sub U, if those propositions imply another proposition, if that implication is true, then then you also believes that one. So essentially, you are closed on the implication. You don't suddenly have your beliefs imply something and not believe that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they call epistemic closure. That, if, for example, there's what's called the KK principle, you know that you know something. Beliefs is something similar. If you believe something that entails another rational belief, there's an implicature there that it implies that for rationality, that if you believe P and P applies some other proposition, you believe that other proposition.
Right. And that's actually where I had a little bit of dissonance with you as well, is the way you were speaking about things in terms of model theory was something I was not familiar with, which is also part of why I wrote this section as well, was so that I could square up what I was trying to say and make sure it was agreeing with what you were trying to say. Yeah, so that communication.
Yeah, because you could have, in stochastic logic, there is something called Moore's paradox, where you could make a statement like it's raining outside, but I don't believe it's raining outside, which seems paradoxical. But there's certain things in beliefs that beliefs are messy, and people can have conflicting beliefs, and people can imply something and not actually believe that state, but they're called peculiar reasoners. I like how you put it here, where you're talking about completely consistent, because consistent actually is something in stochastic logic. It means somebody who doesn't have any contradictory beliefs, and so this perfectly nails somebody who is completely consistent. They have no conflicting beliefs, and they actually, if they believe P that implies something else, they believe if the subject believes U and U implies P, then U has to believe P for additional rationality. So it's just a simple implication, but it's closure. It's going to called epistemic closure. So yeah, I think this is perfectly awesome. I kind of wish I would have put this definition in my paper, but I used sincerity instead. If a person is sincere about the beliefs, if they say they believe something, they're sincere about it, rather than consistency.
Right. And that's actually why I went this direction, is because since I can't read minds, as bald as I've gotten, I am not Professor X yet. Consequently, I only go by, if you say you believe it, then okay, you believe it. Let's go from there.
Yeah.
And that's actually where I go with the first theorem here. So for a subject U and a proposition P, if U believes both P and negation P, then U is not completely consistent. So they're actually, truth be told, they're not consistent in the first place, but they're not completely consistent either.
Yeah.
In fact, I think completely consistent is actually overkill for most everything here, but I wanted to have a good reference, so I took Gensler's definition of completely consistent.
Yeah, they would not be a consistent reasoner if they have even a single belief of the P and not P. So if you believe something and believe the negation, you are not a consistent reasoner.
Yep. And of course, by contraposition and rearrangement, you get the next three results immediately as corollaries, or corollaries, however you feel like pronouncing it.
I say corollaries. I like your pronunciation better. Can you say that again?
Well, corollary.
Corollary. I can't even say that.
Corollary. Yeah. The only reason I can say it is because I actually had a couple of British natives as my professors when I was in college. So I heard corollary all the time.
Oh man, no. I just say always corollary.
Yeah, I still say corollary. I just figured, you know what, I'll be spicy and throw corollary out there.
Corollary.
But corollary 2.2 here is just the same as theorem 2.1, but it's just the contrapositive. So if U is completely consistent, then you cannot believe both P and negation P. It's just simple, turn it around, negate both of them.
Contrapositive.
Now, the interesting ones I'd argue are corollary 2.3 and 2.4. This actually is stated in Gensler's book, but he doesn't prove it because it's one of those things that's left up to the reader. So if U is completely consistent and let P be some proposition, if U believes P, then you cannot believe negation P, which is getting towards your definition of weak theism. And all it is just take the conclusion of the previous statement and do some rearrangements. And I have the calculation actually written right there. So if you swallow pie, get the thing down your throat. So if you don't believe negation, if U does not believe P and U does not believe negation P, well, by the De Morgan's laws, you can break that up by distributing the negation and flip the conjunction to disjunction. But then, if you look at that sideways, the negation of the first one, disjunction the second one, that's just implication. So you write it as an implication, and there you go. And if you do that the same way, but have the second one be the hypothesis instead, you get corollary 2.4. It's the dual notion. So if U believes negation P, then U cannot believe P itself either.
Yeah, so this actually leads into the state of agnosticism, actually, because if you neither believe that P is true nor believe it's false, then it leaves it open for the agnostic position. Because you're saying, if you believe P, you can't believe not P. If you believe not P, you can't believe P. You can't believe both because that would be contradiction, but you can believe neither.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually this has been some time ago, and I got some interesting responses when I posted this on Twitter. I also posted this on my private Facebook page as well.
Oh yeah, I want to hear about your responses too. I want to go through that.
Yeah, I went through the Gumball argument, or the Gumball analogy, and it's very much that. You walk up to a jar of gumballs, which of all things you hear about that a lot in probability classes, and they roll a game of chance. So guess how many balls are in there, if it's even or odd. Well, if you come up to it, well, do you believe it's even? Do you believe it's odd?
No one knows.
Do you believe it's neither?
Yeah, the only rational position to have, because did you read I don't know, did you read my essay on that? Because I have an essay called Gumballs and God, Better Explained.
I did, but it's been some time ago, unfortunately.
But same principle. So yeah, so if you have a jar of gumballs and you have no reason whatsoever to believe one or the other, it's like no information whatsoever, you just a lot of gumballs. You'd be a guess to say it's even as the guess say it's odd, which cannot be rational. So your position should be you're kind of epistemically committed to I believe neither, because unless you just want to say I believe they're even for no reason, which you can. I mean, you don't have to have a justification, but to have a rational belief, you cannot rationally believe they're even or odd if you have no information either way. It's zero data. So your position that you're committed to as far as being rational would be I have no position either way on the gumballs. Yeah.
You could also wildly just say, I think it's even, or I think it's odd, but it's still a guess.
It's a guess, which is not rational by definition because you have no epistemic justification for it. So
exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, the next thing is I burn a little bit of space here by saying this written more concisely. One has the following, and I basically just write them as entailments instead. But it's just the same three results from the above. And then I bring out the square of opposition, which I forget what book I stole this from. I took this from some resource that I found online that just happened to have terminology I liked. But sometimes this happens. Hey, I found a book that has the definitions I want, so I'll use that one. So let P and Q be propositions. If P can never be true when Q is false, then you say that P is the subalternate, Q is the subaltern, and together they form a subalternation. And that's the core of where I believe your paper ends up going.
Yeah, 100%.
Indeed. If P and Q cannot be both true or both false, then they form a contradiction. That's just one's negation of the other one. If P and Q cannot be both true, they're called a contrariety. And if P and Q cannot both be false, then they form a subcontrariety. And it's the same definitions you pulled from. I just
100%.
pulled them from a different source.
Same exact thing. Yeah, basically they're saying, I say contraries, but contrariety. But if they're a contradiction, if one's true, the other has to be false. They both can't be true. They both can't be false. If they're contrariety, one could be true, the other could be false. They both can't be true, but they both can be false. And if they're a subcontrary, then both can be false, but both can't be true. And the same thing as one is true, the other must be false. So there's an integral relationship on the square of opposition, or at least in this case, the semiotic square of opposition, that Dr. Demi, I used his methodological notation, sets up. And this is exactly saying the same thing, that it just sets up the relationship on contraries is what it's basically doing. And you could use it for any kind of contraries. I did the same thing for hot and cold, because you have the neither, which would be warm. And so this is just a perfect way of stating the square of opposition right there for semiotic square.
Yeah, and I thought about actually putting the square of opposition in here, but Steve's paper's already got it. I don't need to put it in there. Then right after that, I basically just restate those three results again, and you have that believing P and believing negation P is a contrariety. Believing P and not believing not P is a subalternation. Believing not P and not believing P is another subalternation. But then, moreover, if you chase the logic of the two negations, they end up being a subcontriety. And And one thing I really want to stress, especially here at the very bottom, this last sentence before the next subsection starts, please note that none of the results of the section depend on the content of the proposition P.
Yep, P could be anything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you want P to be the number of gumballs in the jar is odd, then all of this is still true.
Yep.
If you want to say dinosaurs still exist, all of this is still true.
As long as P is truth apt, as long as the proposition can be true or false, then this would apply for any of them. And it's gumballs. And this is what I'm saying. The reasoning here was not specific to atheism and theism. You could apply it to anything. I just happened to apply it to atheism, theism, agnostic, because people were not understanding the terminology in the academic literature, and they were just basically running off, what American atheists would say, because they don't know jack about atheism. They really don't. And so I was like, okay, how would I argue this to somebody or explain it to somebody who has had no formal or even informal education on these topics? Let's set it up this way and go from there. Could be for any proposition. Anything. And so if they could conceptualize it using some other proposition, like you said, the number of gumballs are even, the number of gumballs are odd, the water's hot. If any proposition, you could apply these exact same logical schema. Any of them. It works for any of them. Try. Any kind of contrary situation, you have this logical schema set up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And again, I referenced the Gensler textbook. A good chunk of it is actually available to read through like Google Books. And down at the very bottom, we'll get to it eventually, I have all the references listed. So again, if you have any questions, you don't have to take my word for it. Go read the books yourself. One thing I wanted specifically for this, but is in my philosophy and mathematics in general anyway, don't believe me. Believe the logic itself. Go, if you don't believe me, read it. Go work through the proof yourself, or better yet, find a counterexample, find a counterproof. It's open source. Go for it.
I said the same thing. Yeah, they don't have to believe me by fiat. I mean, my paper's been out there for a year, and I've had sufficient people that understand the topic, including Dr. Demi. I sent this to Dr. Demi, and he was very cordial and very nice, and he didn't find any substantive errors with it. If you could find a counterexample, it would be really, really cool. But like I said, I think that it's been out there a while. That I doubt it, but it would be really cool. And I would have to probably start from scratch, or at least figure out, how to work around that. But that would be one way to sell the paper. Find a counterexample.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that I'll say about anything. If you could come up with a awesome counterexample that shows something's false, that's a paper.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a pet project that I've been working on for a few years, and I'm stuck in the sense that either I need to find a proof that makes it work, or I need to find a counterexample that shows that it doesn't work, and either one of them is publishable. Because if I prove it, then I have all the logic to back it up. But if I make the counterexample, then that's an example of something that no one's ever seen before.
What would happen if you found a counterexample to the Collette's conjecture, or some of the other ones that, like the Riemann hypothesis, or I don't know. If you found a counterexample to like the Collette's conjecture, it'd be pretty impressive. By the way, I've heard that they don't even work on that conjecture any longer. They're like, nope, forget it. We don't want to bother. And the twin prime is another one that if you could find, some. Well, I don't know. Would there be a counterexample of the twin prime conjecture? I don't know what that would mean.
Unfortunately, I'm not a number theorist, so I'm not as well versed in the twin prime theorem. I think I read about it once.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm not that familiar with it, except that I understand that they're arguing there's some distribution of them, But I mean, again, with the Riemann hypothesis, they're arguing some distribution based upon the Zeta-Riemann function. But if by the way, how famous would you be if you solved something along the lines like the Riemann hypothesis?
Oh, if you could solve the Riemann hypothesis and the Riemann conjecture,
you'd be famous.
Then you'd be famous. Like Andrew Wiles famous.
Andrew Wiles. Yeah, he did the Fermat's last theorem one.
Yep, Fermat's last theorem.
Yeah, with the Poincare conjecture they used for Ricci flow.
Yes, Poincare conjecture. I think.
See, I can't pronounce it. I know of them. I hate pronunciations.
Trying to read a name from a foreign language that is
Poincare.
Poincare, I believe.
Poincare, okay.
It's French, because of course it's French.
That much I knew. Yeah. Well, see, like I said, I'd love for somebody like yourself to like get to that status. That'd be so cool, man. We know Landon. Landon Kurt Knoll is about at that status we're never going to meet. By the way, anybody who doesn't know Landon Kurt Knoll, that dude is like seriously somebody who knows his stuff. But anyways, all right, let's get back to this. We're on 2.2 classical definitions.
Yes, so classical definitions. This is where we go into the definitions you would find in a philosophy textbook. Case in point, the Gensler book that I have behind me, because that's where I took these from. In particular, these are actually in an exercise. These are actually not formally defined. They're actually defined in one of his exercises. That's how well known these are.
I have that PDF. I don't have the physical book, but I have. I know. I'm almost positive I know exactly where you got this from.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the primary the proposition of primary consideration will be there exists a God, which will be written as little g, and I cite appropriate page. From B and G, the following definitions are classically taken. So a subject U is a classical theist if U believes there is a God. On the other hand, U is a classical atheist if U believes there are no gods. Lastly, U is agnostic if U takes no position on the existence of God. And that's taken almost verbatim from Gensler, except I append the word classical because, I mean, the definition is what's at stand here.
Yeah. Now, the one thing to bear in mind is the classical version he's talking about is philosophical speaking as far as the proposition. The classical theist approach is that God is a theistic God, which there's a personalism there, that there's an interactive God. So classical theism is a very specific type of theism, but we're just talking about, he's just talking about classical theist as somebody who just believes there's a God, any God. Mm-hmm. And he's just calling that classical. I would personally, under a theological approach, call that non-classical theism, which include deism. But if you go to my blog, I actually say I use God, gods, or gods. It makes no difference to me. If I say capital G, it's not some monotheistic God. It is just there exists at least one God. There exists a God. God exists. Those are all expressing the same thing, that there's propositionally at some point in time there was a being that existed that we would conceptualize as a general understanding as God that just created everything, foundational reality, I guess you can see. So you don't have to get into the weeds of what they mean by God, because I had people try to do that. They're like, what do you mean by God? Like, I'm not going to spend hours getting into that. If you want to talk about God, go to the theologians. I'm not interested in that. This is just, there's exists a God. If you want to accept that, great. If you don't, that's fine too. I'm not going to spend 12 hours going over what God means. It's just a waste of time. So I think this was perfect.
Yep. So going from here, basically I bring up the symbology that was introduced in the previous section. So as the definitions above are under consideration, I qualify everything by saying classical, distinguish them from the stuff we're going to talk about later. The terms above can be symbolized in the following way. So if you're a classical theist, then U believes G. If U is a classical atheist, then U believes negation G. And if U is agnostic, then that's the same as saying that you don't believe in G and you don't believe in negation G, which equivalently is by De Morgan's laws. You can pull that negation off of both of them and say that you don't believe one or the other. And the reason I bring that up is because the theorem that's right below it, you notice that if you take the union of the first two, you get the complement of the third. And that's where you get what I call here the trichotomy of belief. I'm sure this theorem is in some book somewhere, but I didn't find a reference for it when I wrote this.
Exactly comes. What's funny is Landon and I have a Venn diagram, which just actually is exactly what the Venn diagram shows visually, and it shows that if you're not an agnostic, you have to be either an atheist or theist. If you're not a theist, you're agnostic or an atheist. If you're not an atheist, you're a theist or agnostic, and that these are mutually exclusive sets. And it is a trichotomy. Now there are other things out there that not what's called theological and cognitivist. There's innocence. So if you really want to get into like the deep epistemic relationships, sure there are other positions out there, because the theological and cognitivist would not be any of these. But as far as like the three epistemic states that you can have, the event space, so to speak, you can have belief, disbelief, or suspend judgment. That's what these relate to. Believes P, disbelieves P, which means believe false, or believe neither. Those are your trichotomy of encapsulations of rational positions on the proposition itself. The other ones are not actually on the proposition. A theological cognitivist, which I've talked about before to my audience, is not really making a statement about P. But these are dealing more directly with the proposition. So your union, your the intersections here and the unions and the disjunction. There's no overlap of any of these positions.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, indeed. And I won't go into depth in the proof unless someone wants me to go into depth in the proof. But basically, and there's nothing special about using atheist, theist, and agnostic here. Say that you have the gumball thing again. So if you believe it's odd, believe it's even, or you don't believe either one, you still have the same trichotomy. There's nothing special about what proposition you're talking about in this trichotomy. It's always the three.
To the proof. I love this proof. So go just kind of explain it to people mathematically, because I want the audience to go, holy crap, this is right, because this is a proof. If you think the proof is wrong, find a counterexample. Because this proves the Venn diagram that Landon and I made. It's the same thing.
Or find a flaw in my proof. I mean, I'm not perfect. I got a PhD, but that doesn't mean that I don't screw up every once in a while. I get caught in a mistake every once in a while. It's kind of rare, but I do get caught.
Let's go through it. I went through it the other day and I didn't see anything, but let's go over it again.
All right. Yeah. So, let T be the set of all theists, let A be the set of all atheists, and G be the set of all agnostics. So notice that T intersection with G is going to be empty set. The reason being is because, well, if you're agnostic, you don't believe in God, so there's no overlap between the two of them. Same thing with A intersect G. Same thing. If you don't believe there's not a God, then you're not a classical atheist either. So by definition, I know you don't like that term very much, Steve. But
no, I don't. Look, when you're dealing with mathematics, there are such things by definitions or setting up. You could perfectly fine. But this particular case, you're setting it up, so I have no problem with what you can say by definition.
Yep. I define those sets, and by the definition of those sets, they end up being empty. Lastly, T intersection A is going to be empty set also by corollary 2.2. If you believe one of them, you can't believe the other one. So that's how you get A and T being empty set, intersect empty set. So in which case, if you let S be the the union of those three, that is T union with A union with G, that is a disjoint union. If you're in the set, you're in one of those one of those factors.
And you can't be in more than one. You have to be in at least one. That's
actually what the second half of the proof is showing that you have to be in there.
Let me say what I think some people would argue though. They'd probably say, well, you're already setting it up to prove what you already set up, but that's not really the case. I had more than one person had argued in some of my arguments. They say, oh, you start your argument with if, therefore it's not an argument. It's like, wait, every argument starts with if for modus ponens or modus tollens or any kind of conditional. That's not a refutation of an argument when you start off with if, because you're laying the groundwork for something. If this is the case, you're trying to prove that. That's how a proof works. It is. And so I don't understand how they thought that me saying if was somehow, oh, you're not even, they said this, you don't have any conviction of your argument if you say if. No, that's not how this works.
No.
So that's what I think they would argue. Oh, you're proving what you're already, just kind of defined it to be.
Well, I mean, arguably when you do mathematics in general, you pick the assumptions that'll lead you to a result, because you don't want to end up proving proving something that's false. You don't want a false implication. That's the entire point of doing logic and set theory in mathematics in the first place. In fact, I did a video on this. I forget which video it was. I think it was the video that I did on arguments, actually on arguments. And if you go into the Suppes and the Suppes and Hill books that I reference, not only here, but in the video as well, because I cite my sources in my video as well, which, by the way, all the slides for those videos are available on my website also. So if you want to use those slides for whatever reason, they're there. But in that video specifically, what is an argument? Well, an argument is you start with a set of hypotheses, a bunch of ifs, if you will, and you go through all the work to get a conclusion. So every argument starts with an if.
Yeah, it was bizarre. I'm not even joking. I think the easiest way to even set aside any of that is just to somebody look at this and go, hey, look, again, there is only in the epistemic space, there's only three rational epistemic dispositions. There's to believe it's true, believe it's false, believe neither. You can't believe both, because we've already set that up early on here. That would be a contradiction, at least an epistemic contradiction. So we just throw that out. There's only three things: believe even, believe not even, which is odd, not even is odd, or believe neither in the Gumballs. This is setting up three things. It is a dichotomy, period. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your proposition is. It is a dichotomy: believe, disbelieve, or suspend judgment. So if you believe the proposition, trichotomy. Yeah, I'm sorry, trichotomy. If you believe the proposition, most people call that a theist, right? And if you believe it's false, what else are you going to call it other than atheist? You believe there's no God. I'm sorry, but if you believe there's no God, I'm going to call that an atheist. Some people call it anti-theist, which is stupid, but whatever. But
anti-theist is something stronger than that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the agnostic has no position either way. So when people try to say that atheist is a form, or agnostics are a form of atheist, they're not looking at the logic. They're not looking at the dispositions, because an agnostic is somebody who has no position either way, and yet an atheist is somebody who believes there's no God. That is how these things are generally thought. Because if what happens is, my paper going to argue, if you allow atheist to mean somebody who believes neither, you now have the same thing as agnostic. You literally have two words that mean the same thing, which is my semantic collapse. And then you go on. I love the next one. The next one really shows that you have to have one or the other.
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. So let you be completely consistent, which is the hypothesis of the theorem. So if you're completely consistent, well, let us count the ways, shall we? Well, if you believe it, then you're in the set T, which is in the set S. Okay, cool. Well, if you don't believe G, well, let's consider if you believe negation G. Well, if you believe that one, then you're in A, which is also an S. Okay. Well, if you don't believe this one and you don't believe this one, what's the only thing left? Well, you don't believe both. Consequently, you're in G, which is an S, and you've covered all the cases. It's exhaustive. You've gotten everybody.
Yep. And my only question is there a particular reason why you didn't use a proper subset? I mean, it doesn't have to be, because in theory, everybody could be theist, everybody could be atheist, everybody agnostic. But was there a particular reason why you didn't use proper subsets?
I used subset equals out of habit. The reason being is because I don't want to assume they're proper.
Okay.
Certainly you can prove that they are proper subsets, because you can find somebody who's who's in one that's not in the other. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. But
that's evidential. That's evidential. This is analytical, so you don't have to. It doesn't matter. But obviously, evidentially, we could find people that are in atheist or atheist or agnostic. So I use proper subset, but since this is more formal and it's just dealing with categories, it's fine. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just really curious. I really was like, I get it. But all right, so it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. All right, let's go in. This is the best part. Let's go into the review.
Yes.
I think he says McRae's right on here like once or twice. I love that.
I think I do. Oh my God. So I do want to point out something before we go any further, and that is from up to this point, I have not actually talked about Steve's paper.
No, nothing.
Yeah, up to this point, I have not mentioned Steve's paper. I've mentioned Steve's paper as the motivation, but everything I've cited up to this point has been from other sources that are peer-reviewed and already established. From here forward, now we're talking about Steve's paper.
Yep.
Right? And I actually did print out the PDF of this at some point, and this thing is this review is like, I think 6 pages long or something when I was editing through it. And when I noticed that, it was like, okay, notice that half of this is exposition, and now we're getting into the meat of things.
Yep. Flamo had asked me, he says, are you agnostic on whether they're not gumballs or even or odd? Yeah. Well, yeah, if you have no information either way, you're only really rationally committed to saying that you have no position. I mean, how would you justify if you just have this big jar of gumballs and, Dr. Pye says, I assert that the proposition that the number of gumballs are even, assuming quantified, they're all whole and things of that nature, I would have no reason to believe or disbelieve him unless I go, I happen to like the guy and, I know something about him and he's telling me the truth. But if he just says, hey, you know what, I just think they're odd. And I'll be like, well, I don't have a position either way. I have no reason to believe they're odd or even. You're just guessing. So I'm just going to say that I have neither. I'm agnostic on that. So yeah, that's exactly what it would mean. Yeah. And by the way, knowing somebody is information. If you told me, hey, Steve, they're even in there, I might think to myself, you have information that I don't have. Maybe you count them or something. I just might believe you on the fact that you testified to me that they're even, and I'd be rationally justified to go, yeah, you know what? I believe you. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. People do that all the time. A lot of people don't like to put any kind of faith in other people's testimony, but if you know a person and you trust them, that's a perfectly fine reason to have an epistemic justification for a belief. It really is. We do that all the time. I mean, anybody who's married who has kids, you go around going to your wife, you told me this, but I don't believe you. No, watch how well that works out, right? So
I actually have 2 roommates in the other room, and if my housemate tells me that he played Resident Evil 4 remake all day, I believe him.
Yeah, you don't need evidence for that. And that's another thing. I know one thing about the Non-Sequitur Show you have to kind of appreciate is we dive into all kinds of rabbit holes. So don't take it personally. We just go everywhere. But it's so funny because I talk a lot about burden of proof, which a lot of atheists seem to not understand very well. They really honestly don't. And they're like, well, if you make a claim, you have a burden of proof. I'm like, okay, X equals X. I'm not telling you any about it. I'm not giving you my burden of proof. I'm just saying, they're like, well, you have a burden of proof to prove that. First of all, that's an axiom. But second of all, what is my burden? I can make a claim and not have a burden if I don't want to persuade you. I don't want to have a discussion with you. I'm not trying to have any evidence. The only burden I have is myself to justify my claim. But if I can say, hey, look, my claim is X equals X. I've justified it myself. I don't know why I believe that. I have no onus to anybody else. I don't have to explain to anybody why I believe X equals X. It's the same thing with God. If somebody says, hey, I believe God exists, they have no onus to explain to you why they believe God exists unless they want to have a discussion with you. If they have a discussion, they have a discursory burden of proof. If they want to give you evidence, then there's evidential burden of proof. But until somebody says, look, I can prove God exists, for you to ask them, and not you specifically, but in general, for somebody to ask a theist, well, prove your God exists, you're strawmanning them. That literally is a strawman argument by asking them to do something that is not their claim. So it's just kind of funny when we're talking about burden of proof. I could say, hey, I believe you, and the reason why I believe you is because we have a rapport with you. Same thing with your roommate. Why do you believe your roommate played? What game was it?
It was the remake of Resident Evil 4. It just came out.
Resident Evil 4 all day long. Well, because I know he plays this game before and he's good at it. That's what he does when he stays home. So.
Yep, he's actually been achievement hunting since he beat the game the other night. Yeah, I occasionally will do research and watch him play games on the big screen TV in the front room, and I get a lot of work done, but I also get a lot of entertainment out of it.
Is your roommate is his name happen to be James?
It is. Yes.
Okay.
I actually have 2 roommates, Jason and James.
Yeah,
so
good guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to the actual review. Here's the meat and potatoes part.
All right, and I see you, James. I see you down there. And it did play Resident Evil 4 all day. No lie detected, indeed.
That's how I guessed.
All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. Right. So this section is definitely getting into actually dissecting what Steve is saying. And as stated here, I will be considering this one section at a time because I wanted to focus on what each section said. So in particular, starting with the first section of McRae's 2002, McRae, and I apologize if it sounds impersonal, but that was actually part of the point. I wanted to think of it that way.
I like it. No, absolutely.
Yep. So McRae introduces the notions of classical theism and classical atheism and agnosticism. You didn't qualify them that way, but it's how you wrote it. So, however, he also introduces the following 2 terms where we have weak atheism, and I have citation for 4. That's your paper, definition 1.1. Subject U is a weak theist if U does not believe there are no gods. And a weak atheist, which is definition 2.1, a subject U is a weak atheist if U does not believe there is a God. Now, please note that weak atheist above agrees with, that is the same logically, same definitionally as non-theist from Gensler's book.
Correct.
In the terms of the above symbols that we've already got, you can write them this way. It's a weak theist if you don't believe negation G, and it is a weak atheist if you have don't believe G.
Yeah, it's really just the position of the negator. It's just... That's really what the weak and strong positions were that Michael Martin had kind of derived. George Smith, who wasn't much of a philosopher, he used implicit atheism and implicit theism, but that was a little bit different because that had to do with an awareness of the proposition. But if you're aware of the proposition and you don't believe it, that's called weak atheism. If you believe the proposition is false, they call that strong. I don't like those particular terminologies, believe it or not. I only use them because that's what Flew used, and that's what the literature to describe this uses. But this is my hope on a paper is when you start using these terms, this is what happens. By the way, did your roommate follow your? Did he read this stuff? Did he thought it was good?
I think I offered it to him. I think I said I was going to give it to him, but I never got around to actually doing it.
He's too busy playing Resident
things.
Evil. Yeah, he's too busy playing Resident Evil to read any kind of this stuff. That's cool.
James, I promise I'll give it to you after we're done here.
All right.
But yeah, so have the two definitions. Here's what the symbols look like, and here's the big crux starts. So by corollary 2.3, so the above thing that said that certain things were subalterns and subalternates, a completely consistent classical theist would logically entail being a weak theist, which actually was a comment you made to me, so that it would be worded a little bit better. Which, by the way, that's the give and take. That's the when someone comments about your stuff, you're supposed to take that criticism on board, and you can weigh which way you want to go with it. I thought it sounded better, so I wrote it down. Likewise, a completely consistent classical atheist would logically entail being a weak atheist by corollary 2.4, which is a subsequent result. Consequently, McRae's nomenclature is well chosen and does not violate the classical terms. Steve's right.
Shocker. You know what's so funny is my audience is like, yeah, we knew it. It's but this video will be for the people later on that watch after the fact. They'll come back and go, okay, yeah, you know what? I've read this paper and I've listened to this. He's still wrong, and then you'll ask him, but why? And they'll never have a reason. I swear to God, it's bizarre. But most of my audience, they already know this, and they're out there at the same time, having these discussions with these atheists out there. They're just promoting lack of belief atheism, and yet they'll explain, why don't you, if you think this is the case, why don't you go refute Steve's paper, like you said, find a counterexample. And they never do, and it's bizarre because this is getting a lot of traction. In a lot of communities, and it's just showing that what I've said for years is the case, and the people that are in these atheist communities are just parroting. They're no different than theists just parroting. They're just no different than creationists just parroting. They're not interested in the science, the logic, the epistemology, the philosophy. They're just repeating what they've been told to repeat, and that's why I find that modern atheism, which I call atheism TM, is no different than any other theist group or anything like that. It's just a hive mind. This is why I like independent atheism, independent thinking. So, James, did you read what James said?
Yeah, James. Yeah, I read it. Says he's talked to me about it. Talked to him about it some. Haven't read it. Not a learned man, but I'd gladly just take a look at it. And sure, I'm here to share, friends. Cool. I do want to point out one thing before we move on to the next statement here, which is in my own research, I've actually dealt with weak and strong properties. In particular, I have a result that I'm hoping to put. Here's hoping. I have a result that I'm hoping to put into one of my future papers, not the next not the third paper that I want to put out, but. And what it is doing is showing an equivalence between two categories of mathematical objects. And one of them is a weaker version of a existing homomorphism. And I'm using it as a bridge to something that hasn't been connected to it. And as such, since the morphisms here have a stronger condition than the morphisms here.
You've proved one, you prove the other.
Right. Yeah, so the ones down here are essentially your classical morphisms. The ones I'm going to introduce are going to be weak homomorphisms, and they're going to be shown to be equivalent to this other thing that already exists, showing that this theory is subsumed by this theory.
Is that kind of cool how that works, though? I love that stuff.
It was really exciting because I actually came up with that particular argument at the end of last year. While I was training to start the new job, and I literally shat my pants, dude.
Are these sets or are these like topologies?
These are graphs, actually.
Okay, graphs. Okay.
So hypergraphs, to be more precise. And when I saw that, I was like, oh God, oh no.
You had a revelation. Your brain said, oh shit, I got something cool here, and you wanted to put it out there for people.
It was a little column A and a little column B. A little column A of, oh my God, this is really, really cool. But the thing that really got me was I went, oh no, did my co-author and I just write 3 papers on something that is actually something else? Because I've been writing with a co-author from my previous job. He and I were both at the same university, and we conflabbed, and there's a whole story behind that. That's a story for another time, possibly off air. But we wrote 3 papers saying why graph theory is wrong, and which is why it's been taking so long to get these papers published, because we're telling everybody they're wrong. That doesn't sound familiar or anything.
Those are the best kind of papers, man.
I know, right?
That's the only reason my paper has ever got even any traction is because I'm shitting on everybody else who says I've been wrong all these years because they're like, well, if you're right, Steve, prove it. Okay, I fucking did. What do you want?
Here it is.
Next.
But yeah, that particular we wrote 3 papers at this point. 2 of them one's been published, one's been accepted, the other we're going to rewrite and resubmit. But notably, the math wasn't wrong. We're having trouble with audience because we're crossing 2 different disciplines.
And there's like 7 people in the world that understand anything you talk about when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's basically it. Yeah. But I saw this connected result, and I was like, oh sweet Jesus, did I just invalidate all of our work? And no. Turns out I did a little bit more work, and it actually makes our argument even stronger is what it does.
You know, it's so funny because I swear to God, I have the toughest time remembering bijection, surejection, and injection. I don't know why. Bijection is easy. I get that. But for some reason, I always brain farted the difference between surejection and injection. I know what they are now, and I you know, but I mean, it for some reason, when I was learning a little bit about, math theory, I just could not get it down. I don't know what it was, probably because I wasn't using it all the time, right? When you use terms like surejection or injection a lot, it's second nature to you, right? But for somebody like myself who just wanted to understand, the relationship between a map and a domain and a codomain, and how you have a surjection, and then you actually have a one-to-one correspondence, and if you have unused for an injection, I wasn't getting the concepts down. I really had to sit and figure this shit out. But once I did, I was like, I get it now. But
I do. Here's actually a fun point. Part of the confusion there, because I forget if I had the same problem, but I had a problem similar to that. So just so you know, just because I'm a math guy doesn't mean I get everything the first time either. More on that later. But anyway, there's actually a terminology problem there. The reason being is because mathematics was not done just in English. In particular, Newton's Principia was written in Latin. Why? Because that was just what you did. You wrote scholarly things in Latin because that's the way you did things. Come along Martin Luther and a bunch of other people. But anyway, in German, they use one terminology for analytical things. But in most of the other countries in Europe, French and France in particular, you use more Latin-like terms. So more romantic terms, ironically speaking. So in German, you would say one-to-one and onto for injective and surjective,
because onto it, like it's literally onto the codomain, right?
Yep, and one-to-one means you have 2 things that don't collapse.
Right.
Right. However, in French, you have injective and surjective. Why? Because they're French. That's why. My actual family name is French, which is why I give the French a lot of shit. So,
as you should, in the French. No, I'm sorry.
They are the French.
We love you, French. Great food. Yeah.
They do have great food.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, that entire tangent was basically to say the usage of the term strong and weak is in the literature already. There are a lot of things in my own work, let alone other places, where weak and strong show up. Hell, the category theory
here, though. I mean, the weak and strong atheist, Martin had, Flew had kind of taken that and ran with it. And again, I don't like the term strong atheist and weak atheist because obviously it leads to this. And that's what he was trying to do. He's trying to take, there are strong and weak things, like the strong PCP, what's called the principle of sufficient reason, the weak principle of sufficient reason, which some argue if you accept the weak, it collapses into the strong. But I don't like the terminology for when it comes to atheism, because it just doesn't make sense to me, right? And obviously because I wrote the paper on it. But in mathematics, you get strong and weak all the time, right?
Yeah. If anything, I'd probably go with Gensler's term of non-theist, because you're talking about literally the negation. So that seems more sensible to me.
But see, even in categories, I could derive from first principles because the law of negation. A or not A is always going to be true. So I can say theist and not theist, right? Or not theist, which is just instantiation. So I can have the category. For every category theist, there's a not theist category. For every category of atheist, there's a not atheist category. For every theism, for an agnostic, there's not agnostic. And what the atheists were doing, which Flew wanted them to do, was say theist or not theist, and then just randomly change not theist to mean atheist. It was a semantic That's it. There's a semantic change. That's all they were trying to do. But that's so dishonest, because I show that theists can do the same thing, and they say, well, anybody who's doesn't hold the belief there isn't a God is a theist. No,
right, and that's we're actually going to get to that here in a moment. So let's actually get back on track here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But yeah, because I wanted to make a point about the weak and strong because it's an established thing. But here's where I actually took pause. However, and here's the sentence in particular. However, an agnostic is simultaneously a weak theist and a weak atheist, which causes some pause at these two terms. You have overlap. And for something that says atheist and theist, you'd like those two families to be disjoint. And when you start put weak in them, notably, they're not disjoint anymore because agnostics fall in that category. Hi, me. Hi, Steve. So
we do exist.
We do exist. Yay! There are dozens of us.
I'm validated.
But yeah, that's something that should give you some pause, is because you now have two things that normally would be disjoint that are no longer disjoint anymore. So more on that in a moment. McRae uses the term rational to qualify his statements about beliefs, which by his usage seems roughly synonymous with completely consistent. Indeed, page 2 is dedicated to informal arguments, which prove the analogs of corollaries 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. Steve basically does the same proofs that I do, but he talks about it in a different way. And cool, that's nothing wrong with that.
I just put it up here so the outside can see. This was This was Landon's and I. It's a little off on the outside. I apologize, but I'm not going to fix it for right now. But this was to show you, this was what we came up with. And it shows that there is an overlap between weak atheism, weak theism, where the agnostic would be in the... Yeah. And so when you have the strong positions, those are disjointed. There's no overlap between agnostics, strong theism, and strong atheism, which is just what we call atheism and theism, because they're three independent positions. You have this position, you have the mid position, and you have this one. But when you start adding in these weak things, now you got some problems, because if you're a weak atheist, you have to be either agnostic or a strong atheist. There's no other positions you can have, because if you're not BP, you're either not BP and not B, not P, or you're B not P, which implies not BP. So this weak atheism is not a position. It's ambiguous, because you say I'm a weak atheist. Okay, well, what is your position though? Do you have the belief there's no gods, or you have neither the belief there is a god and not a god? I mean, what is your position? Strong atheism, which I just call atheism, or agnostic? This is what weak atheists don't understand. When they say that they mean atheism to mean merely a lack of belief, that's not a position, because it's one of two other actual positions. It's vague. And that's what, I really wanted the takeaway to be. But anyways, but yeah, as you pointed out here, agnostic is simultaneously a weak theist and a weak atheist. The Venn diagram showed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would actually go one step further with the Venn diagram. The reason being is because, and this actually gets into the latter part of your paper, which we'll get to here momentarily, but you have, again, there's a trichotomy, right? So you're either strong theist, strong atheist, or everything else is agnostic. Because if you're not a theist, but you're not a weak theist, then what are you? Other way around. If you're a weak theist, but not a strong theist, right? Then what are you? You're agnostic. Right. Yeah. So there's only 3 sets here.
Right. Which I've tried to explain for how long, and people are like, Steve's wrong. But anytime anybody's ever asked why Steve's wrong, nobody can explain why, because they're just wrong. They just parrot. Well, Matt Dillahunty says. Who gives a shit what Matt Dillahunty says? Matt Dillahunty's never read an academic paper in his life on this subject.
Doesn't matter what one man says. It all matters as to what the calculation comes out.
Evidence. What's so funny is atheists have always been like, oh, we're about evidence, we're about logic and reason, and yet when you give them logic and reason, they shit on it and they say, well, it doesn't really hold up. Okay, well, why? It's such cognitive bias. It's to the point of absurdity, because they're doing the exact same thing you see, flat earthers do or creationists do. They have such a cognitive bias that when the actual evidence and the actual logic shows that they're wrong, they still will not concede. That to me is telling of dogmatism.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into being an armchair psychologist, but I can certainly speculate. But I find it disingenuous in that regard, because if it's wrong, demonstrate that it's wrong.
Yeah.
That's always the thing. Now, you can speculate, much like the Riemann conjecture and other things. You can speculate whether it's true or false, but until you prove that it's false, you haven't done it.
I believe it's true. But when somebody says, well, can you prove that? No, but it wasn't my claim. But I can certainly believe that the hypothesis is true and be justified to based upon what I understand of the hypothesis. Doesn't mean I can prove it, though. And there's a big difference. If your claim is, I believe this, that just means that you have a dosastic attitude toward it. It doesn't mean the same as I can prove this. I can prove things like 0.99 repeating equals 1. I believe it. I can prove it. I am certain of it. I'm convinced of it. However, I don't have to prove it to anybody. I can just say, look, 0.99 repeating equals 1. That's my claim. And if somebody wants to understand it and have a discussion, that's fine. But when I prove to them that relationship is true and they argue with it and they say it's not true, I don't think they're critical thinkers because that's such an objectively mathematical thing anybody can go look at if you understand, infinite sequences and summations, that when I hear an atheist say, well, give me enough evidence that God exists and I'll believe you, and they don't believe an objective fact of mathematics, I throw the bullshit flag. I don't think they're as open-minded as they appear to be.
Well, some of it does come down to inaccessibility. The reason being is that you can write down a proof that 9.999 repeating is equal to 1, and I even wrote on this in this very blog the actual details of building up from set theory all the way up to the real numbers, and then proving that representation equals to 1. But that's a lot of machinery, and something. And this is where I can speak as a teacher for a moment. I remember teaching calculus a lot, specifically to biology majors and business majors. And let me tell you, there's some stories I can tell.
The struggle was real?
It was real. My housemates could probably talk much more to the feelings of what it was like to deal with when I was grading papers for those classes. Jesus Christ. But that's the thing. You can demonstrate to somebody something. You can have them parrot what the things you want to see from them. That doesn't necessarily mean that they get it or that they understand it.
Sure, but they can go look. They can say, "Look, I don't understand this. Let me go look into it and come back to you." That would be the epistemically honest thing to do, wouldn't it?
That's true. However, I find specifically with the students that I was mentioning, many of them are so opposed to engaging with the material in the first place that they're not going to do it.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine the biology students would have to know math, though. I mean, they deal a lot with, differential equations because of population growth and exponential growth and things of that nature, that they would want to understand the topics. Now, maybe not as much as an engineer would have to understand some maths, but I got to tell you, that's funny. The ones that argue the most, that are educated, that argue 0.99 repeat equals 1, happen to be engineers. I don't get it. And yet they're the ones that should know better.
I could say a lot of things about engineers. I'm not going to.
You're a mathematician. I know you can. All right. But,
yeah.
All right.
Anyway,
go back.
Carrying on.
Yeah, carry on.
Let's see. So the remainder of the section, this is your first section, defines the terms contradiction, contrariety, subalternation, and subcontrariety. While stated in model theory, the definitions seem to be correct and agree with those stated here in section 2.1. McRae uses Boolean functions to illustrate the distinctions between the different terms, which may be helpful for those unfamiliar with his model theoretic approach or the topic in general. Lord knows it helped me, actually. Good. Because I wasn't familiar with these terms until I read your paper and looked them up for myself, and I went and confirmed to make sure the terms are right.
That's why I used it. That literally, because I had the model theoretic approach that got from Dr. Demi, because that's what it was, an L1 system of logic, and so I wanted the what was called the metalogic to be correct. I wanted that framework to be absolutely airtight in the argument, but I also thought to myself, a lot of people are not going to be able to understand this very well. Maybe explain it in Boolean gates, because more people have probably more experience with Boolean logic, and I'm like, why not just do both? Because that way they can see that Boolean logic proves, I hate to use the word prove, but it basically does, by using
demonstrates, perhaps.
Demonstrates is better. Yeah, maybe perhaps demonstrates using truth tables that what I say in the logic that they may not understand is the case. Because it does. I mean, the truth tables, I went through those a few times. I wanted to make sure that they were right. And I thought the gates I used were perfect analogies
I think so. Yes. In particular, the implication one for subalternation. There is I forget if it was in Magnus and Button or which book I read this in, but that there's a distinction between entailment and implication. They're related, but not quite the same thing.
Right. And Dr. Demi and I pointed that out. Dr. Demi said the same thing to me, and I was like, I know, and I was like, I don't mean to use the terms interchangeably. They're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also again, I'm not a philosopher. I'm going back and relearning a lot of this myself. So, and in particular, the proof theoretic things like entailment and whatnot. I'm fairly confident I never did when I was an undergraduate. And in my professional work, I've never had to go that far down. Which is why it's a hobby for me to do it now.
I mean, but it makes sense though. I mean, right? I mean, because you could have conflicting beliefs, so there's an implication there rather than entailment. If I had like, A equals B and B equals C, there's an entailment that A must equal C, right? There's a transitive property there that must be true. But when it comes to beliefs are messy. And so it's more implications than entailments. And so, yes, there is a distinct difference between a logical entailment that must be true because of a logical necessity, as opposed to some kind of epistemic entailment, which is more of an implicature. Yeah. That's exactly what Dr. Demi was talking about in my paper too when he reviewed it. And I think I changed some of the terms. I think I used more implies than entails, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah,
I think he did. Yeah, I think he did.
Yeah, that was because I didn't want to have that, because entails is a much stronger claim than implies. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it literally says that this cannot be any other way.
Yeah, it's a modal claim. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which, by the way, the Ginsler book has a big section on modal logic right before the belief logic section. I haven't delved into it because I'm not planning on having to work on it right now, but that might be a future me problem.
Yeah, you should. Matter of fact, if you could address the modal ontological argument by Plantinga by using S5 modal axiom, it's interesting. It really is, because the way the K, the M, the D, and all these axioms of modal logic are set up, they all deal with possible worlds and how the possible worlds relate. And it's really interesting. I think you might get a kick out of it.
I might, but right now, way over my pay grades.
the guy that writes these things, and I look at I read some of his actual work, and I'm like, is that English? What language is this? You think mine's symbolic? Holy crap!
But anyway, and here's the money shot for the first section. I find no fault in McRae's first section, while not how I would exposit, as illustrated by section 2 above. His information is correct to the best of my knowledge on the topic. Steve's right.
Thanks. Hashtag Steve was right, and that to me was like the crux right there. And I so was amazed when I read that. Because, when people, again, say that my paper's wrong and they can't explain why, here's a person who went through the logic and went through the math more than one occasion. I think you read my paper at least 3 times. I know you read at least 3 times, minimum.
I want to say 4, because the first time I didn't actually read through it in detail. But as I was actually writing the review and starting off to build all of this, yes, I read it at least 3 times.
Yeah, and everybody has a different expository style. And like I said, the reason I wrote mine with lack of brevity in the way I wrote it was really because I really wanted people to read it and go, I understand it. Because this was not written for like the academics. I mean, it's yes, kind of, but I mean, it was written so me and myself as a layperson, I always argued if I can understand something, anybody can. I'm not a super genius, but if I can understand somebody or something, I really believe anybody can if it's explained properly. That's been my whole shtick since I started YouTube. Whenever I talk about something, I talk about it as a layperson and tell people, look, if I can understand this and explain it, you should be able to understand it. I really believe that.
That's actually one thing I took as one of my big philosophical points when I was a teacher, is if I can explain it well to the students, then they'll get it. And if they don't get it, I'll keep trying until they do. And I held. And of course, Jason James could attest to this by how often I was out of the house at the time. I held tons of office hours for that very reason. I wanted them to get it. Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a jerk. So
let me ask you: Did you keep the bottle of whiskey in your desk drawer at school?
I should have, but no, I was a good boy and I drank when I got home.
Single malt Scotch. I need this. So
I had a couple professors who I swear were definitely drinking on the job, but that's another story.
Yeah, no, I don't blame him. I don't blame him, man. I don't want to do the pedagogical stuff, man. Some of the, my sister was a teacher and for like 20 years. She had her PhD in education or some shit, and I did help grade some of her students' papers. These were 10th grade papers, and I swear to God, dude, I thought it was like 6th grade. They were dumb. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, these kids did not know their ass from a hole in the ground. This was not hard shit. They were doing fractions. Mm-hmm. Fractions. I mean, it was mind blowing. And how they just couldn't grasp simple concepts. And I'm like, oh my God, this is absurd.
Some of it this is I don't want to derail onto this particular tangent for too long, but I actually have a colleague who has their degree in mathematics education. And I remember actually sitting in on some of their classes and looking at some of the things that their students have done, and a lot of it comes down to perpetuated fear, honestly. And that was actually, I think, part of the crux of their dissertation. Their dissertation was basically how do we reach these kids? But no, what it was is to present mathematics in a less threatening manner, rather than you have to know this, you have to learn this to get a job. Why don't we pedagogically approach it in a different position? What if we gamify it? What if we set up rules of how you collect points through the course? What if instead of introducing things through cold disjoint problems like 2 + 2 =? What if we pose it as, hey, we got 2 tokens here. How do I get 2 tokens over here? And how many tokens would you have at the end of the day? How do you get this? And their perspective was much more towards combinatorial games, the gold grabbing game, and this, that, and the other. And they had a lot of success with it. But in their research, their background research for their dissertation, they came up with a lot of things and a lot of statistics actually showing that many of the teachers themselves are scared of mathematics and don't understand it. And because of that it gets imprinted onto the students of, oh, this is really, really hard. You'll never understand it. And the students absorb that and becomes their identity moving forward.
I don't doubt that.
And when I was a graduate student, I actually was a teaching assistant. And I taught some of those low-level classes. I think it was at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I taught 100A, I think. And it starts with arithmetic and ends with the quadratic formula. That's the level you're on, and it's a rudimentary course. And for some of the students, I don't blame them at this point. At the time I did, because I was a pissed off student. But in hindsight, I think they were probably failed long before they got to me.
I think you're right. And I think they wish, we'll get back to the second, but I really wish they would start earlier. I work with a lot of young people, and a lot of them go to college. And one of them happens to be taking College of Algebra, which I took, and they're doing,
I'm teaching that.
Yeah, and I didn't have a problem with it. I already graduated nuke school, so college algebra was nothing. The matrix is the only thing that was really kind of new, because we were learning Gauss-Jordan backward substitution and elimination and identity matrices. But other than that, the linear equations and the quadratics was pretty easy. And so she had a problem for me the other day. I swear to God, this is a true story. And she's like, hey, I did this, and this is the answer I got. And it's just a simple quadratic something or other. And I'm like, yeah, I got this answer. And she's like, that's what I got. And I'm like, okay, so what's the problem? They're like, well, the computer program says this wrong when I put it in. And I told her, I said, you know what? I've had things where it's not right. It's all done online. And I said, it's probably the program, because this is the right answer. Sure as shit, she goes to her instructor, and they're like, yeah, don't worry about it. You're right. Because, but it was pretty nice, because I literally got the same answer she did, and we're both going, why is it saying it's wrong? Because it's software. But anyways,
it's software. Yeah. I remember distinctly having those problems because I hated doing this when I was still teaching. Very often, especially for the low-level classes, you would have those online homework systems. I hate those things because if you don't use the right symbols,
exactly
right
right,
buttons,
exactly,
it's a software issue. If the data is not inputted correctly, garbage in, garbage out, you get a failing grade.
But it makes them think that they're doing something wrong, which I don't like.
Exactly, and I've had to troubleshoot that with students, and there's a reason why I don't have much hair left. So
give it time. This is what you'll have to look forward to.
Thankfully, my housemates say I'm getting the Picard skullet, so I think I'm good. I think I'm down. But looking at next section to carry along here. Reading the second section, I really don't have much to say here because most of this was actually a continuation of the previous. But yeah, reading through section 2 of 4, McRae begins the crux of his argument, which is a response to those arguments given in 1. Antony Flew states that he would rather have atheism be understood to mean weak atheism or non-theism. That is to replace the subalternate U believes negation G with a subaltern negation of U believes G. McRae here declares his conclusion that such a replacement should be rejected for semantic reasoning. A good portion of the section reiterates the relationships from the previous section. While the repetition is good from a pedagogical standpoint, it does add to the overall length of the paper.
I accept that.
And again, that's just a formalism thing. And most of my comments in this regard were about the formalism and presentation. Most of the raw logic and reasoning and the content was right because I double checked it and made sure it was right. But I don't have much comments to that except that it essentially reiterated some stuff from the previous section.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
I agree. I would say most, if not all, the logic was correct because it was all correct. But yes, because the semantic stuff, it's more to the argument itself. But as far as like the logic, I think that's pretty well set that anybody who says the logic's wrong, they need to up their game and show why it's wrong at this point because it's just I don't know what else to do. All right, so 3.3 reading weak case conditions.
Right. Yep. So into the third section, and this is actually where I'm going to have you read some things, Steve, because I quote you. Reading the third section of 4, McRae culminates his arguments against Flew. The core of his argument is precisely that if one allows negation U believes G to replace U believes negation G, then an analogous replacement could occur on the other side of the square of opposition. So if you have that square, if you allow this side to get collapsed down to meaning the same thing, you could do. There's no reason why you can't do the same thing on the other side.
Yeah, it literally is what's called my weak. It's called the argument I had was called the weak atheist special pleading argument.
Your WASP argument.
My WASP argument, which has been out for a very long time, and God, do atheists hate that argument because they don't know how to assail it because there's really no way to assail it. It's special pleading. Yeah. Yep,
and that's basically where I get to down in this too. That is replace the. Go ahead and finish reading this. That is replace the subalternate U believes G with its subaltern negation U believes negation G in the definition of theism. Now here's the thing that I pointed out specifically is if you allow both Flew's request and the above parallel request, which I was tempted to call McRae's request,
that's good.
If these two requests are made simultaneously, then McRae argues that a semantic collapse of terms occurs. Moreover, McRae argues that to deny the parallel request, McRae's request, if you will, would constitute special pleading. To the claim of special pleading, McRae is not mistaken. Steve was right.
Hashtag Steve was right. In the live chat, put down hashtag Steve was right. And then when you put this in, put down hashtag Steve was right. Share this video everywhere after we're done, by the way. Yes, thank you.
Yep. So if U believes negation G is replaced by negation U believes G, I see no reason why the analogous replacement of U believes G by negation U believes negation G cannot also be made. While no current theists would likely make such an argument, which from what I understand is like the biggest thing that people throw at this is like, no theist would do this.
Right, and I understand why they wouldn't, but no current Christian would, but that doesn't mean some theists later on won't.
No, exactly. Yeah. So I can imagine, while no current theist would likely make such an argument, I can imagine that given the right conditions, a theist could argue the same.
I could have changed the world and by the way, I didn't actually think about this. This was Oppie originally kind of came up with it. I just formalized it, but yeah, it could have definitely happened. Yep.
So my argument here is basically simply reverse the current political positions between theists and non-theists. So put a bunch of non-theists in power and have the theists be the political minority, and then they make the same argument to try and get their big tent nonsense to get their agenda across.
Yep.
It's the same thing.
Here, it's the same thing right here. Atheism, and you're making the subalternation for the subaltern. You're making both these positions the same term. Because obviously, if you believe in God, they're going to call that theist. And if obviously you believe there's no God, what else are you going to call that but atheism? So Flu's recommendation was make the subaltern here also atheism. And so this is what happens. Atheism is, if you agree with Flu and you say atheism is this position up here and also this position down here, then what you said by parallel request, you can do the same thing here. Or that's special pleading. Simple as that.
Yep. And I would expect that theists might try the exact same slide of vocabulary, because that's really all it is. You're just sliding this term down. How I remember distinctly writing in my notes, actually, classical theist over here and new theist down here as like new atheist. I mean, that's basically what it would be. It's the analogous term.
100%. It's the same.
Yep.
If you have it on one subalternation on the square, you clearly can have it on the other.
Yep. And this is actually where I'll have you read, Steve.
Sure.
Yep. For semantic collapse, McRae argues thusly.
As such, if weak atheism is held as atheism and weak theism is held as theism, then the terms atheism, weak atheism, and theism, weak theism, both collapse to become logically equivalent to agnostic and axiologically depreciated.
Yep. That is, the two terms start to merge in both Flu's request and the parallel request, Steve's request, are granted together. Indeed, a harbinger of dissent was noted in section 3.1 back, where agnostic falls in the intersection between weak theism and weak atheism. This is precisely McRae's point as stated below.
A person who holds to not BS, not G, without holding to BSG, weak theism per definition 1.1, or not BSG without holding to BS, not G, weak atheism per definition 2.1, must hold to both not BSG and not B, not G, agnostic per definition 3.
Said another way, being a weak atheist, but not a classical atheist, and you can append the A's as needed, is precisely being agnostic. That is, you as a weak theist, but not a classical theist, is logically equivalent to you as a weak theist, but not a weak atheist, but not a classical atheist, which is logically equivalent to being agnostic. Factually, McRae is correct on this point.
I love
he was right.
I love the fact you used the triple bar. For logical equivalence rather than just equals. I love the fact that you just such a strong statement there.
Yep, it's right. They're logically equivalent, so use the right symbol. As a stylistic comment, the section and its predecessor could likely be merged and shortened while conveying the same content.
Clearly, I agree with that.
That's all that is.
I agree with that.
And yeah, that's the core part of the review right there. The last section is basically just me kind of giving my own thoughts on this, and that's the paper.
I'll read your final thoughts for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Number 4, final thoughts. Overall, I can't do it in your accent, but which is I can't place it. It's like somewhere back there somewhere. not California.
I'll talk about that here in a moment.
I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna, but it's just somewhere not locally to me.
Certainly not.
Yeah. Overall, I find no error in McRae's objections as written in 4. His logic appears to be solid and consistent with other sources I have cited. While his expository is rough, I grant that, I expect this to likely due more to inexperience with academic writing than to the material content of the paper. I would highly recommend giving his paper a read for anyone interested in the topic. Reading and reflecting upon the content of the paper, I do wonder at the reasons for why one would want to accommodate Flu's request. And I love the way you put this. You say, doing so enlarges the set of people labeled as, quote, atheist, while removing the requirement to hold a particular proposition's truth, namely not G. Moreover, the label atheist legitimately becomes the negation of classical theism, simply simplifying to a dichotomy between theism and atheism. Furthermore, the term non-theist simply is then a synonym for atheist, which is exactly what Flu's was trying to do. He really wanted this non-theist to be the term atheist, but by the way, would not make sense in propositional logic because there are propositions where you cannot replace atheist with non-theist or vice versa and have that be truth preserving. It's called pasity when it comes to propositional content. You want if something is the same, it's called transparent. It doesn't change the truth value, but you can literally have a proposition where by changing one to the other, it can change the truth value, and so it's called opaque. And so, yeah, Flu's request just should have been denied just on that. For example, like I'm a non-theist, but I'm not an atheist. So the proposition Steve's a non-theist is true, but if you were to place that as Steve is an atheist, that would be false. All right. And personally, as someone who identifies as agnostic himself, yay!
You skipped a paragraph.
Oh, did I? Oh, good. Well, okay.
Yeah. However, doing so leads.
Go ahead. You read.
Okay. However, doing so leads to confusion with the existing literature. While this is not unheard of, as denotations do change with time, forcing the change artificially seems unnecessary. Moreover, collecting agnostics as a subset of atheists would agnostics would then. God damn it. I'm not a good speaker.
Then
moreover,
would require
moreover, collecting agnostics as a subset of atheists then would require a distinction between agnostic and someone who truly believes there are no gods. Furthermore, if the parallel request, McRae's request, is granted, then the desired dichotomy between theism and atheism is immediately ruined.
Correct.
And personally, as someone who identifies as agnostic himself, I ultimately want to be convinced of the truth or falsehood of G rather than leaving the question undecided indefinitely. Instead, I find the existing trichotomy between classical atheism, classical theism, and agnosticism sufficient for my needs. I have no intentions of changing my vocabulary in this regard anytime soon.
Yeah. And by the way, your roommate has the same position, and I have a lot of people in my audience that are in the same position. By subsuming agnosticism and atheism, the atheists are not doing themselves any justice, because there are not a lot of people that really will say, look, I don't have a position either way. And there's reasons why I don't have a position either way. And I don't want to be lumped in with the group of people that have a position. Even though they're distinctly different positions, people that try to use the same name for them makes no sense to me. And so, yeah, I'm not going to be lumped in with the atheist because I'm not an atheist. That's not my philosophical position. Neither is yours. Neither is James's. Neither is a lot of my audience. And the ones that are atheists, I applaud, because they're out there going, look, there is no God. Let me tell you why. I can have a discussion with them, and it'd be an interesting discussion, right? They're not trying to hide their, I actually believe there's no gods, but I'm just going to say that I lack a belief. That's dishonest. And by the way, love your citational list here. References.
Yes, and certainly those of you who are interested, follow those citations and read for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Steve's word for it. Don't take James's word for it. Although I take James' word for a lot of things, but
he stays home, plays video games. Is what he's saying. He's lazy. Stays home, plays games. Just kidding.
No, he works hard on his business. Now, you did say something about the Gumball analogy earlier, so I'm going to give you that link right there if you feel like looking at some of the responses that thing garnered. There were a couple that were amusing.
Where'd you put it at?
I put it in the StreamYard's chat, private chat, I think.
There you go. All right, I will add that to this when we're done.
Yeah, there were a couple things. I think there was like one response, which was to answer that profound question: who the fuck cares, and why do you?
What should I label this as? I can put it in the thing right now. What's it's from your Twitter, but what should I call it?
This was the Gumball analogy. Basically, it was me while I was reading your paper and writing down my thoughts. I essentially started thinking about the Gumball analogy because, again, most of the content early on has nothing to do with the proposition being talked about, which is why I wrote that section the way I did. So, okay, let's talk about the number of gumballs in this jar. Is it even or odd? And that I decided to write that up and put it on Twitter, just as kind of as a lark, and got a few likes. Got one guy who was asking, "Why the hell do I care?"
Well, I put my blog in there too. I'm gonna throw it to you real quick. Gumballs and God better explained, so you can show it to those people as well. I'm gonna tweet it to you right now, because I really think that my essay on it really explains the whole Gumball is a lot better, because Matt Dillahunty just doesn't explain it very well, I think. Oh, I don't know how I messed up the thing here. Hang on. Where'd you go? Did you disappear? Let me hang on. I'll fix it.
I honestly actually didn't read Matt Dillahunty's version of it because it's like I don't have to read it. I can just go with the logic and see where it takes me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I highly recommend because Matt's explanation of the gumball actually proves my point. He literally proves that, you know, if you don't have position, you're agnostic. Just because you don't think it's even doesn't mean you have to believe it's odd. You can believe neither. Even though they are a dichotomy, even or not odd is a dichotomy there. Either God exists or God does not exist. But your beliefs are not dichotomous. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember remarking to you, I forget if it was on, I think it was probably on Twitter at this point, or maybe it was in comment, or maybe it was in the live chat for a previous stream, commenting about how the belief operator and the negation operator, I find this entire debacle over the definition of atheism actually fascinating because it's a commutativity problem. Can you put the negation on the other side of the belief operator for free? Do those things commute? Can you swap their order? And the answer is no, you can't.
No, there's a price to pay. Yeah, that's exactly it. There's a price to pay. That's my WASP argument. And if you do, another price is paid is that you lose axiological value, especially in discursory conversations with people. You lose value because when somebody says, "Oh, I'm an atheist," they're like, "What the hell do you mean by that now?" It used to be somebody said they're an atheist, you knew what they meant by it. It was like, yeah, he's a person who believes there's no God. But now it's like confusing. And now there's terms like agnostic atheist and agnostic theist, which are meaningless. And that's a whole different paper that I'm going to be writing. I'm going to have to write one of these days, I have a feeling. But yeah, so there's this price to be had by taking Flu's request, and this is why Flu's request did not get much traction. I don't know why groups like American Atheist and Atheist Republic and those kind of groups, I don't know why they wanted to promote lack of belief atheism. If you wanted to, let's be blunt here, if you want to end religion or you want to get rid of theism and you want to get rid of Christianity and all these different beliefs, which I'm not for, but if that's your goal, isn't it much better to take a stronger approach by saying, hey, look, there is no God, let me explain to you why, rather than, oh, you know what, I just don't believe you. That's just so cowardly. It's not a position to say you don't believe somebody, because you don't know what the position actually is. It's like saying, I'm not a duck. Okay, but what am I? It doesn't tell anybody. It's not informative, really. It just says, okay, you're not believable, but are you asserting there is no God, or you're just on the fence? And those are massively different positions. So.
This is actually where I would pitch, and again, like him or not, there's a fellow on YouTube who has a channel called Secular Talk, and it's a fellow by the name of Kyle Kalinske.
Oh, I know Kyle.
And
yeah, I know Kyle.
Yeah, and again, like him or hate him, again, I'm speaking to the audience a bit here. Yeah. Like him or hate him, he does make one point that I have actually taken to heart, and that is, don't tell me what you're against. Tell me what you're for. Mm-hmm. Tell me what your beliefs are.
Yeah, same thing. Are you familiar with Grice's maxims? It's the same thing. Quality, you want to have quality and quantity. And you want to be relevant to what you're talking about. And if you do have the position that there is no God, to fall back on lack of belief is dishonest. And if you are actually a lack of belief, then why would you want the same position as somebody who believes, or call the same position as somebody who believes there is no God? It seems silly. And so, I've fought this good fight for 10 years. I think my paper is a culmination of that, and how well it's been received, and the fact that after a year, nobody's found any substantive errors with it. And, someone like yourself has went through, and Lannon has gone through it, and Dr. Demi has gone through it. Dr. Abbas, who's a PhD in theistic logic, has gone through it. I'm pretty confident it's a pretty good argument. And I think that it should be used by atheists to reject this lack of belief bullshit. And like you said, argue what you believe. Don't argue what you lack a belief in. That's stupid. That's anybody. We all have an infinite number of things we lack a belief in. Who cares? Argue what you believe. And so I think that's good advice from Kyle. Yeah.
I also like one thing that you said. Kalinske. I do like something that you said very often in streams, which is you're a non-resistant non-believer, mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, because here's a little background on me. I grew up in. If you're wondering where my accent came from, I grew up in Texas.
Yeah, you got a southern drawl. Yeah,
a little bit of that. Actually, I went to university in Texas for undergraduate, and for my master's degree, I went to Nebraska for my PhD. But when I was at the this is going to be fun. When I was at the non-denominational Christian university for my undergrad, they actually thought for the longest time I was like from Oregon or something. They couldn't place my accent, even though, and here's the funny thing, even though I grew up in the town where the school was.
Yeah, because
they couldn't place it.
It could be Texas, Nebraska, Idaho, Montana, Ohio, somewhere in that area kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And here's something from James in the chat. The weirdest thing in the world is trying to explain to either a theist or to an atheist that I neither believe nor disbelieve in God. It's like they can't fathom a complete lack of opinion.
Yeah, but at the same token, you can lean one way or another as agnostic, right? I lean toward right now that there is no God, but I'm not convinced of it, right? And so you can have some, nobody's exactly 50-50 unless on the Gumballs. And then you have no information. There's zero data. Now, there's something called a zero data agnostic, which I typically used to identify with, but that to me more implies that there is no data to be had. And I didn't really mean it that way. It really is, there's evidence either way, and you're not convinced either way. And so I think that's a lot of people in that position. And as a non-resistant non-believer, most of us are like, okay, we can talk about the subjects. And if there's a God, then it kind of is in his ball court, let him, figure out if he wants to have a relationship or not. And so
that's actually, it's very much
put that way. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
Yeah. Well, that's very much where I am actually. There have been, I was a theist for a long time. I was a theist until officially I gave it up. Gave my faith up completely around 2016, 2017, somewhere around there. But before then, I was pretty much on Team God until I got to graduate school, and I started learning more about logic and reasoning.
It wasn't. By the way, you weren't a younger creationist, though, right?
No, hell no. Although in my hometown, there is a particular church which I shall not name because I don't want to give away my hometown. But I actually did some reading up on that place. The place already had a reputation for being the cult that locked you in during church services. And turns out, yes, they did. But turns out I did a little reading. They promote young earth creationism. Wow. It was in my hometown, dude. No and it gets worse. It gets worse. Kent Hovind went through there. I was like, oh my God. Have you listened? He came through my town when I lived.
You know how many times
I need a shower now.
You know how many times Ken has been on this channel. I used to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Ken's been on a few times, and I don't think I'm gonna have him on again. I was deciding. Right now, I'm not pro having Kent on again because of the fact I think he is an abuser, and I just don't think there's anything to be had. And I'm not about the ratings or the numbers or anything like that. I know a lot of people would watch it, but I'm so sick of Kent. I mean, he's just not a good person. He's not a good person. And I don't like that on this channel. We've had enough people on this channel that I had to deal with who are not good people. And I just don't see a need to bring them on. And speaking of which, somebody, by the way, had noted, yes, we know Trump was indicted. yes. Speaking of that. But, it's so funny because James had mentioned about disbelief. And all the literature talks about disbelief as believing negation. And yet I wrote a blog entry about Matt Dillahunty being wrong when he had a caller called up. And the caller, who I knew, had told him, he's like, well, disbelief means to believe false. And Matt was chastising him. Matt was telling him how wrong he was. And yet all the evidence showed that Matt was completely incorrect on it. And, you could use colloquial understandings about, I stared in disbelief and things of that nature. But here's the thing. When you're talking about philosophy and you're talking about God, and you're talking about ontology and all these propositions, these have usages and long-standing understandings. And so when you're talking about disbelieving of a proposition, sorry, Matt doesn't get to dictate what that is understood as. And he's wrong about it. He was absolutely wrong about it. Did he ever apologize? No, but he shat on this caller, saying how wrong the caller was. And I know the caller had a pretty good understanding of logic. And he's like, no, Matt, you believe propositions, or you disbelieve them, or you have no position either way. He's like, but disbelief means to assert or believe in negation. And Matt's just like, oh, you're just so wrong. I'm like, hey, Matt, who are you citing here? Are you citing Ginsler? Because I don't think Ginsler would agree with you. Are you citing Hintika? Because I don't think Hintika would agree with you. Are you citing Draper? No. What paper have you read on this, Matt? Nothing. Matt Dillahunty is uneducated when it comes to philosophy and logic. He's never, to my knowledge, never once cited a single solitary primary source. Not once.
Well, here's the thing, and this is something that in my own philosophy, as well as in my own studies of mathematics and writing papers and whatnot, you can You can go through and build your logic however you want and build your terms however you want. However, that too comes at a cost. If you want to define terms the way you feel like they should be defined, and sometimes in my head I've done this and I've regretted it, what happens is that when you try then to communicate that to another person, that's the problem. There's a language barrier. You have your own terms, but you come to someone else and try and explain that to somebody else. Right. They're immediately going to go, huh? Question marks all around their head. This is when you get into things like AI and whatnot of like, what if you had an AI who's running over here in a corner or something, brain in a jar kind of thing, solipsism. This AI may come up with its own language or programming or some nonsense, and then you try and interpret what its output is. Well, it's not going to be human readable because it's going to come out in something you don't understand. So exactly. There has to be some common ground, and that's baked in history and all these other terms. I'm sure people would love to have theism and atheism be a dichotomy. I'm sorry, that's just not how historically what the terms have meant. Should it be changed? I don't know. That's kind of that's an odd question that I'm not going to play with that.
Yeah, Flew argued it, and I argued that no. And by the way, you it's funny you gave a perfect example of Wittgenstein's private language argument. That's exactly what he was arguing. If you were the only one that knew your language, would it be a language? You wouldn't be able to communicate it with anybody. And by the way, I should take it back. Matt Draper has cited Stanford Encyclopedia, which is peer-reviewed, and it's Draper. So I'll grant him that one. But other than that, he doesn't cite anything. But yeah, no, Wittgenstein really did argue the same thing. Private language argument is like, yeah, you can make up all these different terms and all those semantic contents that only you know, but it's a private language. You wouldn't be able to explain it to anybody. The beetle in the box argument that he called. But anyways, I kept you long enough. It is 2 hour mark. I do keep these under 2 hours, so I'm gonna let you go and then wrap it up.
It's been fun
with my audience. So where can they find you? I have your Twitter in the video description and your blog, so those are the two places. And I know I got to put your channel on there.
Yeah, there's basically 4 places you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at evilpie. You can find me at YouTube, William Pie, at William Pie, because I now have the lat symbol like that's come out recently. So Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, I'm at Evil Pie. I stream video games periodically. In particular, I'm a bit of a fan of Warframe. I'm a Mark. And what was the 4th one? YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and I forget the last one is.
Your blog.
My blog, yes, of course. Where if you like anime crossed with Men in Black fan fiction and random thoughts that I have written out in blog form, including thoughts on Steve's paper, it's there. So blog, Twitch, Twitter, YouTube.
You haven't got any. I'm surprised there's nobody commented on your blog.
Unfortunately, it used to have a thing where you could use your Facebook account to comment there,
plugin. But
I think the plugin broke.
Oh yeah, I don't use mine that much either for my blog either. So, and they're mostly silly comments. But I really like if you guys want to communicate with Dr. Pie, go to his Twitter and then he can figure out how to like work it out with you. But if you think he's wrong, show it. There you go. Go read his blog. It's there for anybody to go. Peruse at your leisure, and if you think it's wrong, just show us. Okay. If you want
to take it down and take it down in the sense of writing a response to it, then go at it. Write a response. I mean, that's the whole point of communication. Is I say what I think. You say what you think, and see what happens.
Right. Well, I appreciate it immensely. I really do. I know that it was a lot of work in the making to get this all done, and I know you have a lot of that stuff to do. So I am humbled, and I'm very much appreciative of you taking the time to do this, and it means a lot. I mean, seriously, I think that people that have been so adamant that I was wrong are going to be eating a lot of crow, because now they just don't have me to contend with. They have to show you wrong, Landon wrong, Dr. Abbas wrong, and Dr. Demi wrong, and Dr. Josh Rasmussen. He read my paper. He's a great guy. He's a theist, so they don't believe him really because he's a theist. But they have to show a lot of people that argue now that yes, Steve's right, are wrong, and you could do that with a counterexample or just find errors, I guess. But
yeah, well, same thing actually. Gensler's a theist, I think. If you read his biography in the front or back cover of his book in his Introduction to Logic, I think it says he's like Roman Catholic or something.
Yeah, well, I know Burgess Jackson is, and I actually think Demi was. I thought Demi was an atheist, but I think he actually is Roman Catholic too. So yeah. So interesting. Like I said, doesn't matter to me if you're a theist or an atheist or agnostic. It goes by the logic. It goes by the evidence. Mm-hmm. So let's go where the evidence lies. You have my paper in the video description. Go check it out, guys. You have his blog. Go check out. I'm going to leave the StreamYard so you can get going on your thing. And I'm just going to wrap it up at the exit. And I want to thank you again. And I'll be in touch with you the next day or two. I'm going to finish this and go grab some more. I already had dinner, but I'm hungry again. And then I'll reach out to you and kind of, do a touch base with you. Sound good?
Will do. Sounds good. Thank you again for having me on.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Take care.
All right, guys. That was fun. I really appreciate you guys taking time to watch this. If you guys get a chance, go to the Great Debate Community channel. I got to get some views on there to keep my numbers up, to keep monetized. But I just did a stream with a not so brilliant refutation of my paper. Completely antithetical to what you just watched here. Go check it out if you want to have some fun, because it's pretty fun. The comments that people had made are just super silly. So with that, thank you for becoming a member. I know we have a couple new members. Thank you, Savani. He became a member, and thank you, Mods April, for showing up. And if you guys got any questions, please leave it in the comment section. And I appreciate all your support. And just do me a favor, share this video everywhere. Share this video everywhere. Get evilpie's blog out there too. And he has so much other stuff too. So make sure if you go check out his blog, you read some of his other stuff on like real number theory. It's pretty interesting. Guys, I will bid you good night, and I will see you later on.